The moment I realized my husband was lying to me, he was asleep beside me, breathing like a man with absolutely nothing to hide. It was almost 2 in the morning. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while I sat alone with my laptop, trying to catch up on bills before the weekend. Jason had fallen asleep downstairs after too much bourbon and one of his usual late-night business calls. At least that's what he called them. Business calls. By that point, I had stopped asking questions because every answer sounded polished, rehearsed, and strangely emotionless. 12 years of marriage teaches you dangerous things. You learn how someone sounds when they're tired. You learn how they sound when they're angry. And eventually, you learn how they sound when they're hiding something. Jason had started sounding different 6 months earlier. Not colder exactly. Worse. Careful. That carefulness infected everything. The way he locked his phone. The way he smiled while texting. The way he suddenly became obsessed with going to the gym after years of barely touching a treadmill. Even his clothes changed. Expensive cologne. Tailored jackets. New watches he pretended were client gifts. Meanwhile, I was still the same woman packing our daughter's lunches every morning and folding laundry while listening to true crime podcasts in the kitchen. I think part of me already knew. Women always know before they admit it to themselves. The thing that finally cracked everything open wasn't lipstick or perfume or some dramatic confession. It was a parking charge on our joint account. $270. Miami Beach. I remember staring at the screen for nearly a full minute because Jason had supposedly been in Chicago that week for a real estate conference. I even remembered helping him pack. I remembered ironing one of his white shirts while he stood in the bathroom practicing some presentation out loud. At least now I realize he probably wasn't practicing for a conference. He was practicing lies. I clicked the transaction mostly out of curiosity. Attached to it was a PDF receipt. Most people would have ignored it. Jason probably assumed I would too. But there it was. A valet parking receipt from a luxury hotel in Miami. 2 guests. Not one. My stomach dropped so hard it actually hurt. I wish I could explain that feeling properly. It wasn't just jealousy or heartbreak. It felt physical. Like my body suddenly understood danger before my brain could catch up. My hands went numb. My ears started ringing. For a second, I honestly thought I might throw up right there onto the kitchen floor. Then came the worst part. I checked the dates. Jason hadn't just lied about the trip. He'd missed our daughter's piano recital to be there. That recital mattered to her. She kept scanning the audience that night, trying not to cry because her father's seat stayed empty. Jason had called afterward pretending his flight got delayed because of weather. There was no weather. He was in Miami with another woman while our 11-year-old daughter sat under stage lights, pretending she wasn't heartbroken. Something inside me changed after that realization. Not exploded. Not shattered. Changed. Quietly. Dangerously. I didn't wake him up. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry yet. I just sat there in silence, listening to the refrigerator hum while rain slid down the windows. Then I did something I had never done before. I opened his email. I still don't know why he forgot to log out that night. Maybe people get sloppy when they think they've already won. Maybe liars eventually start believing their own stories. At first, I found nothing unusual. Flights. Work contracts. Property documents. Normal things. Then I found a folder called Tax Documents. Inside were photographs. Not spreadsheets. Not receipts. Photographs. My chest tightened instantly. The first picture showed Jason sitting beside a blonde woman on a yacht somewhere bright and tropical. His arm rested casually across her legs like it belonged there. Like he had done it 1,000 times before. The second photo hit even harder. Because there was a child sitting between them. A little girl. Maybe 6 years old. Smiling directly at the camera. And Jason looked at her the exact same way he looked at our daughter. That's the moment my brain stopped functioning normally. I remember zooming in on the image with shaking fingers, trying to convince myself I misunderstood something. Maybe it was a niece. Maybe a client's family. Maybe literally anything else. But then I saw the caption underneath. Family weekend. I swear my heart actually skipped. Not metaphorically. Physically. I couldn't breathe for a second. My husband didn't just have another woman. He had another life. And somehow, that wasn't even the worst part yet. Because 20 minutes later, while digging deeper through old emails, I discovered something that made the entire situation feel insane. There wasn't just one woman. There were three. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that little girl smiling between them on the yacht. The image kept replaying in my head like a scene from some psychological thriller I never agreed to be part of. By 5 in the morning, Jason was still asleep upstairs while I sat in the dark kitchen surrounded by cold coffee and screenshots of his emails. I remember thinking one specific thing over and over. How long does someone have to lie before it stops feeling wrong to them? Because this wasn't one affair. Affairs are messy, impulsive, emotional. This felt organized, structured. Like Jason had built entire parallel realities and somehow kept them separated for years. I started digging deeper once the sun came up. At first, I told myself I only wanted answers. But if I'm honest, I had already crossed into obsession by then. Every email opened another door. Every receipt uncovered another version of my husband I had never met. Different hotels, different flights, different names. And somehow, every woman seemed to believe she was the only one. Around 8 that morning, Jason finally came downstairs wearing sweatpants and rubbing his eyes like a normal husband starting a normal Saturday. I watched him pour coffee while humming softly to himself, completely unaware that my entire reality had collapsed 6 hours earlier. That was the terrifying part. He looked calm. Not guilty. Not nervous. Calm. He kissed my forehead and asked if I wanted breakfast. I almost laughed. Instead, I just stared at him and wondered how many times those hands had touched someone else before touching me. "You okay?" he asked. And the craziest thing is, he sounded genuinely concerned. That messed with my head more than anything. Because truly manipulative people don't act like movie villains. They don't twirl mustaches and smirk while destroying your life. They smile normally. They ask about your day. They remember your coffee order. Jason made pancakes that morning while texting another woman right in front of me. I know because I saw her name flash briefly on his screen. Vanessa. Not the blonde woman from Miami. Someone else. I felt this cold wave move through my body. Not panic anymore. Something sharper. Controlled. Like my emotions were hardening into survival instincts. That afternoon, after he left for the gym, I called the number attached to one of the emails. I still don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted confirmation. Maybe I wanted pain. Maybe part of me hoped there was still some innocent explanation waiting for me. A woman answered on the third ring. Her voice sounded warm, relaxed, young. "Hello." For a second, I froze completely. Then I introduced myself. There was silence. Long silence. The kind that instantly tells you everything. When she finally spoke again, her breathing had changed. "I think you have the wrong number," she said quietly. But I could hear fear underneath her voice. "I'm Jason's wife," I told her. Another silence. Then something happened that I never expected. She started crying. Not dramatic crying. Not fake crying. Real panic. I could hear her trying to breathe through it. And then she whispered something that made my blood run cold. "He told me you divorced years ago." I remember gripping the kitchen counter so hard my fingers hurt. Apparently, in her version of reality, I was the bitter ex-wife who couldn't let go. Jason had shown her edited photos. Old separation paperwork from a rough period we'd gone through years earlier. He'd built an entire narrative where he was trapped in legal issues with me but emotionally committed to her. Her name was Emily. She was 32, a pediatric nurse from Tampa. And she'd been with my husband for almost 4 years. For years. Long enough to celebrate birthdays together. Long enough to meet his fake business partners. Long enough to discuss having children. While I was home helping our daughter with math homework and believing my marriage was simply going through a difficult season, Emily kept apologizing during the call like she had committed some unforgivable crime. But honestly, after 10 minutes, I realized something horrifying. She was being manipulated too. Jason had created separate realities for all of us. Carefully customized lies designed specifically for each woman. Different stories, different personalities, different promises. To me, he was the exhausted provider working endlessly for his family. To Emily, he was the emotionally wounded, almost divorced man trying to rebuild his life. I should have hung up after that call. Any sane person probably would have. Instead, I asked her something dangerous. Did he ever mention another woman? The silence that followed told me she already knew the answer. Yes, she whispered eventually. A blonde woman named Rachel. My stomach tightened instantly. Miami. The yacht photos. Rachel. Emily explained that she had discovered Rachel accidentally 8 months earlier. Jason convinced her Rachel was unstable and obsessed with him after a brief relationship. He claimed she kept trying to ruin his life because she wanted money. Classic. Make the women distrust each other before they ever compare stories. But Emily had secretly kept screenshots, photos, dates. And when she started sending them to me, I realized the situation was far bigger than I imagined. Rachel wasn't just another affair. She had a child. Jason's child. The little girl in the photo wasn't random. She was his daughter. 6 years old. Hidden from me for her entire life. I actually stopped breathing for a second after learning that. I had to sit down because the room started spinning. 12 years of marriage, and somehow my husband had another child living 3 states away. But the true insanity came 30 minutes later, because Emily sent me one final screenshot before we ended the call. A reservation confirmation. Luxury resort. Aspen, Colorado. Next weekend. 3 guests booked. Jason, Rachel, and another woman named Claire. At first, I assumed it had to be a mistake. Then Emily said something I'll never forget. I don't think they know about each other either. For the next 3 days, I lived like a woman preparing for war. I smiled through dinner with my daughter. I folded laundry. I answered emails. I even sat beside Jason on the couch while he watched playoff basketball like nothing had changed. Meanwhile, my entire nervous system felt like exposed wires. Every sound made me jump. Every vibration from his phone made my stomach tighten. I couldn't look at him normally anymore because all I saw were layers. Lies stacked on top of lies until I couldn't tell where the real version of him even existed. And somehow, Jason kept acting perfectly normal. That's what terrified me most. People always imagine cheating husbands becoming distant or careless. Jason became more attentive, more affectionate. He brought me flowers on Tuesday. He kissed my shoulder while I cooked. One night, he even looked at me softly and said, "We should take a vacation soon. Just us." I almost dropped the wine glass in my hand. Because at that exact moment, another woman was probably hearing the same promise. Maybe 2 other women. Maybe more. That thought started poisoning everything. I couldn't sleep beside him anymore. Every time he touched me, my skin tensed automatically. But I forced myself to stay calm because I needed information more than I needed confrontation. So I started documenting everything. Flight confirmations, receipts, hidden email accounts, locations from shared credit cards. I even bought a small notebook and kept it buried inside my closet like some detective from a crime documentary. Looking back now, I understand how unhealthy that sounds. But betrayal changes your brain chemistry. It turns ordinary people into investigators because your survival instincts suddenly stop trusting reality itself. By Thursday night, I had identified 4 women. Emily in Tampa, Rachel in Miami, Claire somewhere in Denver, and a 4th woman named Natalie who appeared repeatedly in restaurant reservations and hotel bookings across California. Different cities, different timelines, different versions of Jason. The craziest part was how organized everything looked. He scheduled trips carefully, rotated stories, used separate credit cards. Sometimes he even sent himself fake work emails to create alibis. This wasn't reckless behavior. It was a system. A fully operational double life. Actually, multiple double lives. I remember standing in our bathroom one night staring at myself in the mirror and thinking, this is insane. This is actually insane. Because normal affairs eventually collapse under guilt or chaos. Jason's world seemed almost mathematically controlled. The level of planning involved made my skin crawl. Then Friday happened. And everything got worse. Jason left early that morning claiming he had meetings downtown. Around noon, I logged into our shared phone account online and noticed something strange. A second phone line. I froze instantly. We only had 3 lines on our family plan. Mine, Jason's, and our daughter's. But there was another number hidden under business expenses. I clicked it. Hundreds of messages appeared. Not regular texts. Encrypted messaging app verifications. My pulse started racing so hard I could hear it in my ears. That second phone had been active for almost 5 years. 5 years. I don't even know how to explain the feeling of realizing your marriage existed beside an entire secret infrastructure. Burner phones, hidden accounts, fake conferences, separate financial trails. It stopped feeling like infidelity and started feeling criminal somehow. Then I noticed repeated payments connected to one address in Nashville. A condo. Not rented occasionally. Owned. Jason owned another property I had never heard about. I actually laughed when I discovered that because my brain couldn't process anything normally anymore. The situation had become so absurd it almost felt fictional. But the laughter disappeared fast. Because 30 minutes later, I drove there. Not Nashville. A storage facility 20 minutes from our house. The address connected to several receipts inside his email history. I still don't know what I expected to find. Maybe clothes. Maybe documents. Maybe proof that could finally make sense of all this madness. Instead, I found an entire hidden life packed into a climate-controlled unit. Men's clothing. Women's shoes. Children's toys. Photographs. Furniture. There was even a framed family picture sitting on a shelf. Jason. Rachel. The little girl. Christmas morning. I physically staggered backward after seeing it. Not because he had another child anymore. I already knew that part. It was the intimacy of the photo. The comfort. The familiarity. He didn't look like a cheating man pretending to care. He looked happy. Like that family was real to him too. That realization shattered something deep inside me. Because until then, part of me still believed I was the real wife and the others were distractions. But standing inside that storage unit, surrounded by evidence of multiple carefully maintained lives, I understood the truth. Jason wasn't escaping from one reality. He was addicted to creating new ones. Then I found the box. Plain black cardboard. No label. Inside were dozens of driver's licenses. Different names. Different states. Same face. My hands started shaking violently. At first, I genuinely thought they had to be fake novelty IDs or something stupid from college. But they looked real. Professionally made. Some even carried different birthdays. That's when fear finally replaced heartbreak completely. Because cheating was one thing. This was something else. And right as I stood there trying to process what I was seeing, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. A woman's voice whispered 3 words that changed everything again. You need to leave. The second I heard her voice, I knew she was scared. Not nervous. Not emotional. Scared. The kind of fear that makes people whisper even when they're alone. You need to leave, she repeated quietly. I turned slowly inside the storage unit, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. For one insane moment, I thought maybe someone was watching me through hidden cameras. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly while I stared at rows of sealed boxes and children's toys that didn't belong to my family. Who is this? I asked. But she ignored the question. If he finds out you were there, it's going to get bad. Then she hung up. Just like that. I stood frozen for several seconds, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers cramped. Every instinct suddenly screamed at me to get out. Until that moment, this entire nightmare had felt emotional. Betrayal. Affairs. Lies. But now something darker had entered the picture. Because terrified people don't warn strangers for no reason. I left immediately. The drive home felt surreal. Every black SUV behind me looked suspicious. Every stoplight made my pulse spike. I kept replaying the call over and over, trying to recognize the voice. Was it Emily? Rachel? Another woman? Or someone else entirely? When I got home, Jason was already there. That alone nearly stopped my heart. His car sat in the driveway even though he wasn't supposed to return until evening. I remember sitting in my car across the street for almost a full minute, suddenly terrified of my own husband for reasons I still couldn't fully explain. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Jason. "Hey, babe. You okay? You seem distant lately." I actually felt cold reading it. Because while I was standing inside his secret storage unit finding fake IDs and hidden family photos, he was casually checking on my mood like some attentive suburban husband. That level of compartmentalization disturbed me more than the cheating itself. I finally walked inside trying to act normal, but Jason immediately noticed something was off. He stood in the kitchen drinking sparkling water, still wearing his gym clothes. "You look pale," he said. There it was again. That calm voice. That terrifying calmness. I muttered something about a headache and tried walking past him, but he lightly grabbed my wrist. Not aggressively. Almost gently. Still, my body reacted instantly. I flinched so hard he noticed. And for the first time in 12 years, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Suspicion. Not guilt. Suspicion. "You sure you're all right?" he asked quietly. The room suddenly felt too small. I could smell his cologne, hear the ice shifting inside his glass. My brain screamed at me to stay calm because somehow I knew confrontation right then would be dangerous. Not physically dangerous exactly. Something worse. The kind of danger that comes when someone's entire constructed identity starts collapsing. That night, after he fell asleep, I finally called Emily again. She answered immediately like she'd been waiting. The second I mentioned the storage unit, she went silent. Then she whispered, "Oh my God, you found one." "One what?" Another pause. "A setup location." I didn't understand what she meant at first. But then Emily started explaining things that made my stomach twist harder with every sentence. Apparently, Jason had used different apartments, condos, and storage spaces for years depending on which woman he was seeing. Separate wardrobes. Separate furniture. Separate photographs. Entire staged environments customized for different realities. He once told Emily he hated Christmas decorations. Meanwhile, I had just found a photo of him wearing matching pajamas beside another family's Christmas tree. Nothing about him was consistent. Nothing. Then Emily told me something that honestly sounded insane. She thought there were more women than we knew about. At first, I dismissed it because the situation already felt impossible. For women was already monstrous. How could there realistically be more? Then she explained. Different names kept appearing accidentally. Strange messages. Overlapping schedules. Once, she even overheard him using an entirely different voice during a phone call. Different accent. Different personality. "He becomes whoever people need," she said quietly. That sentence stayed with me. Because suddenly every memory from our marriage started rearranging itself differently in my head. Jason adapted constantly depending on who he spoke to. With business clients, he sounded confident and polished. With my daughter, gentle and patient. With me, dependable and emotionally exhausted. Maybe none of them were real. Maybe every version was performance. Around 1 in the morning, Emily sent me a folder she'd been secretly collecting for months. Photos, screenshots, addresses, flight logs. And buried inside was something that made my blood freeze completely. A marriage certificate. Jason had married Rachel in Nevada 3 years earlier. I stared at the document for nearly 30 seconds before my brain accepted what I was seeing. Legal marriage. Not symbolic. Not fake commitment. Actual marriage. While still married to me. My hands started trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. That's when the situation stopped feeling like infidelity altogether. This was fraud. Identity manipulation. Bigamy. Maybe worse. And somehow, the craziest part still hadn't happened yet. Because the next file Emily sent was a photograph taken outside a restaurant in Dallas 6 months earlier. At first glance, it looked normal. Jason sitting at a table beside an older man. But when I zoomed in, my stomach dropped instantly. The older man was my father. I couldn't breathe. I checked again. And again. Same silver watch. Same scar near his eyebrow. Same face. My father had been dead for 8 years. At least, that's what Jason told me. I must have stared at that photograph for an hour. Maybe longer. The image refused to make sense no matter how many times I zoomed in. My father sat across from Jason outside a restaurant in Dallas, wearing the same brown leather jacket he always wore during winter. His posture, his hands, even the way he tilted his head while listening. It was him. And yet that was impossible. Because 8 years earlier, Jason stood beside me in a hospital hallway and held me while I cried after doctors told us my father died from a stroke in Arizona. I saw the death certificate. I attended the funeral. I buried him. At least, I thought I did. By 3 in the morning, I couldn't think clearly anymore. Every new discovery rewrote another piece of my past. It felt like somebody had reached inside my life and quietly replaced the foundations while I wasn't looking. I called my older brother Daniel immediately. We hadn't spoken much recently. Life got busy after Mom passed away, and honestly, Jason never encouraged family closeness. At the time, I thought he simply valued privacy. Now I realized isolation had probably been intentional. Daniel answered, sounding half asleep. The second I mentioned Dad, his voice changed completely. What are you talking about? I sent him the photograph. Then I waited. 30 seconds later, my phone rang again. That's him, Daniel whispered instantly. I could hear movement in the background like he was pacing around his apartment. Where did you get this? My chest tightened hearing the panic in his voice because it confirmed I wasn't losing my mind. Then Daniel said something that nearly made me collapse. I always thought the funeral was weird. Apparently, he'd questioned several things after Dad's death years earlier. Closed casket. Rushed cremation. Jason handling almost every detail personally because I was supposedly too emotional. At the time, everyone appreciated how supportive my husband seemed. Now it sounded horrifying. Daniel also admitted something else. 3 years ago, he received a phone call from an unknown number. Nobody spoke. But he swore he heard Dad breathing before the line disconnected. He convinced himself grief was affecting him psychologically. Now neither of us knew what to believe anymore. I barely slept before confronting Jason the next morning. Honestly, confrontation isn't even the right word. By then, I needed answers the same way drowning people need air. He stood in the kitchen making coffee when I walked in holding my phone. The sunlight coming through the windows made everything feel painfully normal despite the insanity unfolding underneath our lives. Jason looked up calmly. You're awake early. I placed the photograph directly on the counter between us. For the first time since this nightmare started, I saw genuine emotion crack through his composure. Not guilt. Fear. Real fear. He stared at the image too long before speaking. Where did you get that? The question itself told me everything. Not, that's impossible. Not, you're mistaken. Just fear. I felt suddenly furious in a way I hadn't before. Not emotional fury. Something colder. Years of manipulation collapsing into clarity all at once. You told me my father was dead. Jason's joy tightened slightly. Then, unbelievably, he tried to recover. He is dead. I almost laughed because the lie sounded pathetic now. Weak. But what happened next completely changed the direction of everything. Jason stepped closer and lowered his voice. You need to stop digging. No anger. No shouting. That made it worse. People become quiet when they're no longer trying to protect feelings. They become quiet when they're protecting secrets. I remember staring at him and realizing I didn't actually know this man at all. Not his real job. Not his real finances. Maybe not even his real name. How many women are there? I asked. His eyes shifted slightly. Not enough to miss unless you knew him intimately. That tiny hesitation gave him away. Too many to count quickly. Then I asked the question that truly mattered. Who are you? For a moment, neither of us moved. The kitchen suddenly felt silent in this horrible, unnatural way. Even the refrigerator hum seemed distant. Jason looked exhausted for the first time in years. Like maintaining all his identities was finally becoming physically heavy. Then he said something that still haunts me. You were never supposed to see all this. Not denial. Not apology. Just exhaustion. My skin went cold. Because innocent people fight accusations. Manipulative people redirect them. But Jason sounded like a man watching carefully constructed walls collapse in real time. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and immediately muted it. But not before I saw the name. Claire. The woman from Aspen. The woman who supposedly didn't know about Rachel or Emily. Something snapped inside me then. Not emotionally. Strategically. Because suddenly I understood something crucial. All of us were isolated intentionally. Separated intentionally. Controlled intentionally. And the only reason Jason survived this long was because none of the women compared realities. Until now. So while he stood there trying to regain control of the situation, I did the one thing he never expected. I opened a group video call. Emily answered first. Then Rachel. Then Claire. And the second all three women saw each other on screen beside me standing across from Jason's kitchen counter. Jason's face finally lost color. I will never forget the look on Jason's face. For years, he controlled every conversation, every version of reality, every woman separately. He survived through isolation, through confusion, through carefully customized lies designed to keep us from ever comparing stories. And in less than 10 seconds, all of it shattered. Rachel appeared first on the screen holding her daughter in her lap. Claire answered from what looked like a hotel room somewhere. Emily joined last, visibly shaking before she even realized who else was there. At first, nobody spoke. You could actually feel the confusion moving through the silence. Then Rachel looked directly at me. Who are they? Jason stepped forward instantly. Don't do this, he said quietly. That calm voice again. But it wasn't working anymore. Because fear had finally reached him too. I turned the phone toward him fully so all three women could see his face standing in my kitchen. And suddenly everything exploded. Rachel started crying first. Claire looked physically sick. Emily just stared at the screen like her brain had disconnected completely. Then the questions came all at once. What is happening? Who's she? You said you were divorced. You told me she was unstable. How many women are there? Jason kept trying to speak, but nobody listened anymore. Years of manipulation collapsed under pure chaos. Every lie contradicted another lie in real time. Different timelines. Different promises. Different identities. And then Rachel said something that changed the entire atmosphere instantly. What name did he use with you? The room went dead silent. Because until that moment, none of us considered the possibility that even his name might be fake. Claire answered first. Michael. Emily looked horrified. He told me his name was Daniel. I felt my stomach drop. Because to me, he was always Jason Carter. Rachel slowly looked toward the man standing in my kitchen. You told me your real name was Andrew. Nobody spoke for several seconds after that. Jason finally stopped trying to interrupt because there was no point anymore. The structure had collapsed too completely. Watching him stand there silently while four women compared entirely different versions of him felt surreal. Like we were dissecting a human being who technically never existed. Different birthdays, different careers, different family stories. At one point, Claire admitted he claimed to work in private finance for international investors. Meanwhile, Emily believed he developed luxury medical properties. Rachel thought he inherited family money after his parents died overseas. None of us had the same story. None. That's when I realized something truly horrifying. Jason wasn't balancing multiple relationships. He was performing multiple identities. Then Claire suddenly asked a question none of us expected. Did any of you ever meet his brother? My chest tightened immediately. Jason had always told me his younger brother died from addiction years ago. But Rachel answered first. Yes. Then Emily quietly said yes too. Claire looked pale. They were all different men. Cold spread through my entire body. Different names. Different backstories. Different brothers. It sounds unbelievable now, even hearing myself explain it. But in that moment, the truth became unavoidable. Jason created supporting characters inside each fabricated life. Entire emotional histories designed to make his stories feel real. That level of deception felt almost inhuman. Then things got worse. Rachel's daughter suddenly walked into frame holding a drawing. Mommy, look what Daddy made me. Daddy. The little girl smiled innocently while showing construction paper covered in glitter and stickers. My chest physically hurt watching it because whatever monster Jason had become, that child genuinely loved him. And for the first time since this started, I saw actual emotion break through his face. Not manipulation. Pain. Real pain. He stared at the little girl quietly before whispering her name under his breath. That moment complicated everything. Because monsters aren't supposed to love people. But somehow he did. In broken, destructive, terrifying ways. Then Claire asked the question that changed the conversation completely. Has anyone checked if he's even legally Jason Carter? Silence. I watched Jason carefully then. And I knew instantly from his expression that nobody truly knew him at all. Rachel began crying harder. Emily muted herself completely. My own hands started trembling again because suddenly every memory from the past 12 years felt contaminated. Even my marriage certificate might have been fake. Then my front doorbell rang. Jason's entire body tensed immediately. Not annoyance. Panic. Real panic. Nobody on the call spoke while he slowly turned toward the front hallway. The bell rang again. Longer this time. Then came 3 hard knocks. Jason whispered something under his breath I couldn't fully hear. But I caught one word clearly. Shit. And somehow, deep down, I already knew. Whoever stood outside that door wasn't there because of us. Jason looked like a man whose entire nervous system had just shut down. Not scared in a normal way. Cornered. The knocking came again, louder this time, echoing through the house while the women remained frozen on my phone screen. I could hear Rachel breathing hard. Emily kept whispering, "Oh my God," under her breath. Claire looked like she was about to faint. Meanwhile, Jason didn't move. That terrified me more than anything, because until then, he always adapted quickly. Smoothly. Every lie came instantly. Every explanation sounded prepared. But now he stood completely still, staring toward the front door like he already knew exactly who had arrived. Then a voice called from outside. "Federal agents. Open the door." Everything inside me dropped. For one insane second, I honestly wondered if I was about to discover my husband was some kind of serial killer. At that point, nothing felt impossible anymore. Multiple identities. Fake marriages. Secret properties. Hidden children. I had stopped trying to predict the truth because every answer somehow led somewhere darker. Jason finally looked at me, and I swear I had never seen his real face before that moment. No charm. No warmth. No carefully controlled confidence. Just exhaustion. Pure exhaustion. "Hang up the call," he said quietly. I didn't move. The knocking got louder. "Sir, open the door now." Rachel started panicking immediately. Claire disconnected completely. Emily kept asking what was happening, but honestly none of us understood anymore. Then Jason did something unexpected. He sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Not like a man preparing to run. Like a man finally realizing he couldn't. I opened the front door myself. 2 federal agents stood outside wearing plain clothes with badges visible near their jackets. Behind them sat 2 black SUVs parked across the street. One of the agents asked for Jason using a completely different last name than mine. Not Carter. Marlowe. I felt physically dizzy hearing it. The agents entered calmly, but the atmosphere shifted the second they saw Jason sitting at the table. Apparently, they expected resistance, because both men visibly relaxed once they realized he wasn't fighting. One agent began reading rights, while the other quietly scanned the room. I remember standing there unable to process reality anymore. It felt like my life had transformed into somebody else's nightmare overnight. Then the older agent looked toward me carefully. "Ma'am, how much do you know?" I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the question sounded impossible. How could I even answer it? I thought I knew my husband. Then I discovered affairs. Then fake identities. Then another marriage. Then my supposedly dead father appearing in photographs. At that point, knowing anything felt meaningless. The agents exchanged a look after hearing pieces of the story. And slowly, carefully, they started explaining what Jason actually was. Not a spy. Not a hitman. Not some secret criminal mastermind. A professional fraud architect. Apparently, Jason, or whatever his real name was, spent nearly 15 years creating fabricated identities to manipulate wealthy women financially and emotionally. Some lost money. Some signed property transfers. Others unknowingly helped him establish fake businesses and credit histories under multiple names. And somehow, I had been his longest relationship. 12 years. The agents explained that maintaining one stable suburban marriage helped legitimize all the other identities. To outsiders, he appeared trustworthy because he looked like a successful family man. Meanwhile, every separate woman reinforced another version of his fabricated world. I felt sick listening to it, because suddenly every memory became evidence instead of love. Every anniversary, every vacation, every birthday gift, part of a system. Then came the detail that truly broke me. My father wasn't dead. At least not when Jason told me he was. The older agent explained they believed my father had entered witness protection years earlier after cooperating in a financial fraud investigation connected indirectly to Jason's network. Certain records were sealed for safety reasons, and somehow Jason manipulated fragmented information after intercepting communication tied to the case. I barely understood half the explanation because my brain felt overloaded by then. But one thing became horrifyingly clear. Jason had inserted himself into my life intentionally. Meeting me wasn't random. Marriage wasn't random. Even my father's disappearance had become useful to him. I remember turning slowly toward Jason after hearing that. He still sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring at his hands. And for the first time, I asked the question that actually mattered. Did you ever love me? One of the agents tried interrupting, probably thinking the conversation was emotionally dangerous. But Jason looked up before anyone could stop him. And what he said still haunts me. You were the only life that ever felt real. I wish he had denied everything. Honestly, I wish he sounded evil, manipulative, empty. Instead, he sounded broken. That's what makes people like him dangerous. They're capable of real emotion inside completely false realities. Somehow both things exist simultaneously. Then the agents stood him up and placed him in handcuffs. And that's when the final shock hit me. Because as they walked him toward the front door, my daughter appeared halfway down the staircase, watching everything. Silent, confused, heartbroken. And Jason looked at her with absolute devastation on his face before whispering one sentence. I'm sorry, Bug. That was the nickname he'd called her since she was 3 years old. And in that moment, despite everything, I realized my daughter was about to miss him anyway. The house felt wrong after they took him. Too quiet. For years, Jason filled every room with movement. Phone calls, music, coffee brewing before sunrise. Even his footsteps had a rhythm I recognized instantly. And suddenly all of it disappeared overnight like someone erased a person from inside our lives. But the strangest part was this. The grief stayed. That's what nobody prepares you for after betrayal. People imagine anger surviving longest. Or humiliation. But grief is worse because it makes no logical sense. You mourn someone while simultaneously discovering they never truly existed the way you believed. My daughter cried herself to sleep for nearly 2 weeks. That destroyed me more than the lies ever could. She kept asking impossible questions. Was any of it real? Did he love us? Why would he fake everything? I never knew how to answer honestly because I still didn't fully understand it myself. The FBI contacted me several more times over the following months. Apparently, there were even more women than we discovered during that video call. Some knew him for only months. Others for nearly a decade. Different names. Different states. Different professions. One woman believed he was a military contractor. Another thought he owned hotels overseas. One woman genuinely believed she was legally married to him in California. The scale of it felt unreal. But eventually I stopped focusing on the investigation because emotionally, none of the details changed the central truth. The man I loved was both real and fake at the same time. That contradiction haunted me for months. Sometimes I'd remember him teaching our daughter how to ride a bike and suddenly start crying in the grocery store. Other times I'd feel furious remembering how naturally he lied while kissing my forehead every morning. Therapists call it traumatic disorientation. Your brain struggles because the memories themselves remain emotionally real even after the person connected to them collapses psychologically. And honestly, the hardest part wasn't losing my husband. It was losing my own certainty. For months, I stopped trusting every instinct I had. If someone lied to me that completely for 12 years, what else could I fail to see? I questioned friendships, conversations, even compliments from strangers suddenly felt suspicious. At one point, I became obsessed with reviewing old photographs, searching for clues hidden in plain sight. Tiny inconsistencies, different watches, different signatures, hotel receipts accidentally visible in backgrounds. I kept thinking maybe there had been some moment where I could have stopped all this earlier. But that's the trap. People like Jason survive because they understand emotional hunger better than ordinary people do. He studied loneliness, trust, desire. He became whatever each person needed most. And the terrifying thing is, he was very good at it. About 8 months after the arrest, Rachel finally called me again. Not crying this time. Calm. She told me her daughter still asked about Jason constantly. Apparently, he used to read to her every night during visits. Different voices for every character. Homemade pancakes shaped like cartoon animals every Sunday morning. Listening to her hurt in ways I can't explain because those details sounded exactly like the father my daughter knew too. That's what made everything feel so psychologically twisted. He wasn't pretending affection mechanically. He genuinely connected with people. But somehow he could never stop performing. Rachel eventually asked me something I still think about constantly. What if he wanted all those lives because he hated himself in every single one? I didn't answer her then. But I think about that question all the time now. Because during the trial, investigators revealed something unexpected. Jason's real childhood was brutal. Foster homes, abuse, constant identity instability from an early age. One psychologist described him as someone who learned survival through reinvention. That explanation didn't excuse anything, not even close, but it complicated the hatred. And sometimes complicated emotions are harder to heal from than simple ones. A year later, I finally sold the house. Too many ghosts live there. The kitchen where I discovered the parking receipt. The staircase where my daughter watched him leave in handcuffs. The bedroom where I slept beside a stranger for over a decade believing I was safe. I moved to North Carolina with my daughter after that. Smaller town. Smaller life. Simpler. And for the first time in years, things became quiet in a healthy way instead of a lonely one. Sometimes people ask whether I ever visited him in prison. I didn't. But 3 months ago, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. I'm sorry I kept searching for new lives instead of protecting the one that mattered. No signature. No explanation. Just that. I sat staring at those words for almost an hour because part of me still recognized his voice inside them immediately. And honestly, that scared me more than anything else. Because even now, after the lies, after the arrests, after discovering I was never the only woman, a small part of me still missed him. Or maybe I just missed the person I believed he was. And sometimes, late at night, I still don't know the difference.